Should you buy or rent a house in 2023? This has become a pretty controversial question considering how crazy the housing market has gotten over the past few years. Some of you might think that buying a home in 2023 isn't the best idea since mortgage interest rates have more than doubled in the past 2 years, making the cost of owning a home far more expensive than it was before. However, on the flip side, you might also be thinking that renting might not be the best option since rents have been rapidly rising along with inflation, meaning it might be better to buy a house now so that you can lock in a mortgage and avoid having to pay higher and higher rents every year. Buying a home or continuing to rent is a massive decision for anyone to make, especially during these really strange financial times, and that's why I'm going to walk you through a truly realistic example of the finances involved in buying and renting a house in 2023, as well as going over some of those intangible factors that come into play so that you can confidently make your decision to buy or continue renting for yourself. And just to be clear, in this buy versus rent analysis, I really did my best to make everything as accurate and realistic as possible to get to the bottom of this debate. But at the same time, it is impossible to factor absolutely everything into account because there are so many different scenarios we could account for. So if you think I made any mistakes, then feel free to let me know in the comments. And once you're done commenting, don't forget to scroll back up and like the video because these videos take me a very long time to make and your support is really appreciated. So let's get started. The first step when comparing buying a home versus renting a home is to compare these two options using similar homes. By comparing similar homes, we are comparing apples to apples. Instead of comparing something completely different like buying a luxury townhouse in California to renting out a ranch house in Washington state. So to find a home available for sale and a home available for rent that are actually comparable, I started by finding this house for sale on Zillow. It's located in my hometown of Spokane, Washington, and it's priced at $370,000. I chose this home because it is very standard 3-bedroom house and it is close to the average house price in the US. And I feel like the majority of people watching this video would be looking to buy something similar to this home. To find the rental equivalent of this house, I then searched for a comparable home for rent in the same area. I found this almost identical house that is listed for rent at $2,175 a month. Both houses are around 1,500 square feet, have 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. So I think it's fair to say that the market rent for this $370,000 home is about $2,175 a month, meaning that if you were looking to live in a house like this one, you could either choose to buy it for $370,000 or choose to rent the same house for $2,175 a month. So let's break down the cost of renting versus buying these homes. First, I wanted to make a few assumptions clear that I'm going to be using in this comparison. Since home buyers stay in their home for an average of 13 years, I'm going to calculate whether renting or buying is cheaper over a 13-year time period. I'm also going to assume an annual inflation rate of 3.8%, which is how much more expensive things will get year over year during these 13 years. And yes, while it's true that we are experiencing abnormally high inflation right now, it isn't very likely to continue this way over the course of 13 years. If we check out historical inflation rates in the US, we can see that in 2021, inflation was much lower at 4.7%. In 2020, inflation was at 1.23%. In 2019, inflation was at 1.81%. And so I decided it made a lot more sense to just use the 1960 until now average inflation rate of 3.8%. Instead of assuming that the current very high inflation rate of 8% is going to continue over the next decade or so, which I think we can say is pretty unlikely to happen. Okay, now let's take a look at the cost of renting this $370,000 house. We worked out earlier that the market rent for this home is around $2,175 a month. Another cost you will have when renting is renter's insurance, which is around $20 a month for a house like this. You'll also have one more cost when renting, and that is the many fees landlords will tack onto your rent for things like smart home features, utility management, and parking. I'm going to assume $80 a month for these fees, which brings our total monthly payment to $2,275 a month. But this is only our payment for the first year. Throughout the 13 years we live there, our rent and other expenses will rise because of inflation and other factors. So I'm going to assume that our rent and expenses will increase with inflation, which again is 3.8% annually. This means that even though we start off renting at $2,275 a month, as rents rise over time, we will end up paying over $3,500 a month in year 13. So I'm going to take the average cost of rent over the 13 years, which comes out to be $2,873 a month. So this is our total average inflation adjusted rent that we would be paying over the 13 years. The next step is an important one in the rental option, and that's calculating the money we can make through investing the money we would have otherwise used to buy a house. Because if we were to decide to rent instead of buy a home, we would be sitting on a lot of unused cash. And in finance, we are taught that money has an opportunity cost because it can be invested to make even more money. So to calculate the opportunity cost, what we will need to do is take the average down payment for a home in the US, which is 12% of the purchase price. So I'm going to assume we are the average. So 12% of a $370,000 home is $44,400. We would also have to pay around 2% of the home's price in closing costs if we bought the home. So we also saved an additional $7,400. When renting, we do, however, have to usually pay 1 month's rent to the landlord as a deposit. So we can deduct the cost of the deposit, and if we total these numbers up, then the amount we saved because we chose to rent instead of buy a home is $49,525. We can invest this money to make additional income. So let's say we invest into an S&P 500 stock market index fund, which has historically returned around 7% a year adjusted for inflation. Then after 13 years, we would have turned our initial investment of $49,525 into $119,347, which is equivalent to around $729 a month in extra investment income. We can subtract this number from the total monthly cost, which gives us $2,144, which is our average monthly cost of renting the house over 13 years. So now let's take a look at the numbers if we were to buy this house, $370,000 house, instead of renting it. In this case, we are buying the house with $44,400 down payment and paying $7,400 in closing costs, which is a total of $51,800. The rest of the money to purchase this house will come from a mortgage loan. Right now, the average 30-year fixed rate mortgage is around 7%, which is much higher than it was a while back, and using this week's 6.94% number, our average mortgage payment on this home will be around $2,153 a month. Unlike renting, this number is fixed, so we don't have to worry about adjusting for inflation, which is one of the benefits of owning a home. But there are so many more costs involved when owning a home, and these costs will increase with inflation. You have to pay property taxes for this home. I worked out that the average taxes paid over 13 years would be $265 a month. You also have to pay a homeowner's insurance, which will average $164 a month. And one expense that people often forget to factor in when buying a home are the repairs and maintenance of a home. For example, let's say every 10 years or so you have to replace your roof, and this will cost you $15,000. Then you have to set aside $1,500 each year to budget for this repair. There are a lot of different repairs that need to be budgeted for, and the amount really varies based on things like the size, age, and location of your home. In this example, I think assuming it will cost an average $300 a month is fair. We'll also have to pay mortgage insurance since we are putting less than a 20% down payment on the home. This is basically an extra payment that you have to make to help secure the mortgage lender since we have a smaller down payment, so the loan is considered more risky to them. In this case, we would need to pay $160 for the first 8.5 years of owning the house, which works out to an average of $105 a month over the 13 years of owning the home. This brings our total monthly out-of-pocket housing expense to $2,987. And something that I think is really interesting is that our out-of-pocket housing expense of $2,987 is far more expensive than what we calculated would be the initial price of renting the home, which is $2,275 with the fees included. And that is something you might not expect, because in a normal market, you would think that renting has a greater out-of-pocket cost at first. But in the case of this market, interest rates and house prices have increased so fast, and while rents have increased fast, they haven't caught up with the cost of owning as of right now. But we're not quite done calculating the true cost of owning a home just yet. Here's where it gets really interesting. There are a lot of monetary benefits that come with owning a home that you don't get with renting. When you make monthly payments towards paying off your mortgage, a portion of the money goes towards paying off the interest of the mortgage, and the rest goes towards paying down the mortgage principal. During the 13 years we own the house, we will be paying off around $437 a month in principal, which is equity we are building in the home. So it isn't actually a cost, it's more like a forced savings account that's trapped in your home until we sell or refinance it. Another form of savings we receive from owning a house, opposed to renting, is tax savings. As a homeowner, we are allowed to deduct our taxable income by the amount we spend on our mortgage, interest payments, and property taxes. So in this case, we will spend $1,981 a month on interest payments and taxes, so we are able to reduce our taxable income by this amount. Another form of income we will gain from owning a house is appreciation. Over a long time horizon, housing has historically always increased in value. Data shows that real estate over the long term has historically kept pace with inflation. So since we are talking about owning a home for 13 years, which is a long time period, we can assume that our house will likely go up in price somewhere close to that 3.8% year inflation number. So in 13 years, our house will actually be worth around $600,000. So because we have bought the home for $370,000 and sold it for $600,000, on a monthly basis, we will gain around $1,480 in appreciation, which is a gain that we can subtract from our housing expense. But we're not done yet. We also have to factor in how much it costs us to close on the home, which we said earlier was $7,400, as well as the cost of selling the home after 13 years. I'll assume that this will cost 7% of the sales price of the home, since a typical realtor's fee is 6%, and you also have to pay for a few other different things when selling a house. Even though we pay these expenses when we actually buy and sell the home, I'm going to stick to calculating everything on an average monthly basis, so this will cost us $317 a month. This brings our net monthly cost for owning a house down to $951 a month. I know it's crazy to go from an out-of-pocket housing cost of $2,987 and somehow end up at a true cost of only $951. But that really is the power of tax advantages, equity buildup, and house appreciation. So this is the moment you've all been waiting for. In this scenario, buying a house is actually $1,193 cheaper than renting the same house over 13 years. And that being said, there are just so many different factors that can change the result of the buy versus rent analysis. To name just a few, your tax rate, how long you stay in your home, whether you invest or not, how much the housing market appreciates, and the rate of return of your investments are all things that can change the outcome of what's cheaper. Just because in this scenario it's cheaper to buy a house doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't make sense for you to rent. If you don't want to worry about housing repairs, buying and selling a house, and want to have the flexibility to move whenever, then renting is a better option than buying. Another thing that's important to know is, as our analysis showed us, buying and selling a house is really expensive. So if you only plan to live in a home for a small time, then you won't have much time to recoup these costs, so it will make more sense to rent. In most cases, it makes more financial sense to buy if you plan on living in the same place for 3 to 5 years or more. But I think the biggest takeaway from this video is that even in these rough times where buying a house is really expensive, and where there's even a risk that your house might decrease in value shortly after you buy it, over the long term, speaking from a strictly financial perspective, it usually makes sense to buy rather than rent. House appreciation is such a huge creator of wealth in the US, and unless you're the savviest of investors, it's most likely going to be a better investment to put your money in a home that will appreciate over the long term. So I know I just threw a ton of information at you. I'm really curious to know what you think about the topic that we discussed today. If you could leave a comment and like my page, I'd appreciate it. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.